On the next Probably True Solar Stories, we conclude our series, The Solar Heist, or How I Got Into the Solar Business. It's about two neighbors who unexpectedly form an odd friendship and work to uncover a solar energy crime syndicate. But arresting the syndicate's leader turns out to be more complicated than they expected. Welcome back to Season 3 of Probably True Solar Stories and the finale episode of The Solar Heist. I'm Tor Solar Fred Valenza, your solar fiction host and storyteller. I'm on a mission to get solar energy into our everyday pop culture so that people and policymakers will see solar as a mainstream part of our energy mix. With over 4.5 million solar installations in the US alone, by gum, it is energy. It's been quite a solar coaster journey since we first met Maz and Charlie in part 1 of this series. After 10 episodes spread across 3 seasons, we've had a lot of twists and turns. And now it's time for our heroes to confront their nemesis and reveal the true reason for Charlie's DOE intelligence unit's undercover assignment. I'll have more thoughts about the theme of this story and its solar truths at the end of the episode. If you're listening to Probably True Solar Stories for the first time, do check the show notes for links to the past heist episodes. It really will help you to understand how we got to this ending. And now for the conclusion of the Solar Heist. Kinda. Okay, here we go. The Solar Heist, or How I Got Into the Solar Business, Part 11, Rewind, is written and read by Tor Solar Fred Valenza. When I was 5 years old, I watched this old flying car movie called Chitty Chitty Bang Bang on video with my grandfather. There were a lot of gadgets, a flying and a floating race car, spies, good people, and evil kings and queens that got what they deserved. Then the movie ended, and I was so frustrated. Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, Potts, his family, truly scrumptious. They were all flying in the sky, and I wanted to know where they were going. I asked my grandpa what happened next, and he couldn't tell me. Well, I had a tantrum. I needed to know where they went. Did Chitty take them to Staten Island and beat up the kids who were beating me up? To quiet me down, Grandpa bought me some ice cream, and then he sat me down. He said, "Massimo, some stories look like the end, but they really don't end, because you can reread the book or rewind the tape and start all over again. And maybe if we watch Chitty Chitty Bang Bang enough times, you could imagine what's going to happen next." That's kind of what happened with me and Charlie when we met Mrs. Solar Pope. We rewound the tape together, and finally, Charlie and I got to understand how we met. And based on our conversation with Mrs. Pope, we could imagine what was going to happen next. I'm getting ahead of myself again, but bear with me. I'm almost finished telling you what I need to tell you. Before Charlie called me, Randy and Danny, the two DFM shitheads, were hurting but conscious in their bathroom natural habitat. I had a few bruises and scrapes, but nothing too serious. And that's when the strip club bouncers came in. "They tried to rob me," I said to the bouncers. "They wanted more cash for the girls, but I wasn't drunk enough. Look at their wallets." That was kind of the truth. Seeing it was 2 against 1 and that Randy's wallet was out of cash, they believed me. I said I didn't want to press charges and left. There was no way they were going to go to the county board meeting, so I felt that I'd done my job for Sylvia. Solar farm would pass the commission and start construction. When I got outside, I saw the missed calls from Sylvia and Charlie. I called Charlie first, and he gave me the backstory about Sylvia, Beth, Pauline, and the assassins, and what Sylvia had said about the DFM. I took it all in, and then I exploded. "Where's New Jersey? Where's my wife, Charlie?" "I don't know," Charlie said quietly and in a lot of pain. "New Jersey is our own safety code word for going dark and off the grid. She's on burner phones now. We're avoiding safe houses known by the DOE and Homeland Security. We have a system to send messages. I'll tell you about it later. Right now, I've got a gunshot wound in my arm. and I'm outside a house where the Solar Pope is. And by the way, the Solar Pope is a woman. Charlie told me the address, and I arrived 10 minutes later and parked behind his car. The drone was still hovering above the house and the surrounding green alfalfa field. There were no trees, no fences, no cover. If someone was inside that house, Charlie and Max were sitting ducks, but Charlie said all was quiet. Before getting out of the car, I pulled out 2 handguns, stuffed one in my belt, and kept one in my hand. Crouching low, I moved over to Charlie's driver's side window. Max the dog was in the passenger seat, looking mopey. When he saw me, he cheered up a little and crawled over Charlie's lap to say hello to me. "Maxie," I said, petting him. "I'm sorry, boy. I'm really sorry." Max licked my hand. "How's your arm?" I asked Charlie. "Not too bad." I put on my belt as a tourniquet. Supposedly, there's a first aid kit inside, and she's unarmed. I haven't approached the house, and I haven't seen any movement in the windows. But there is one room with a light on. I made my own scan and saw the backlit curtains in what looked like the living room. "Why don't you call her again and tell her to come out?" "I did. The number's been disconnected." "Okay. What if we send in Max the dog first?" I said. "Max the dog saved my life today." Charlie pet Max on the head. "I think he'd do it again for Max the man." "Would you, boy?" asked Charlie. "Max the man taught me a few commands over the years. Let me try something." Charlie nodded and opened his door. Max the dog's 90 pounds of fur and teeth slipped over Charlie's lap and then to me, crouching by the door. I made a whistle command, a pitch that went sharp and dipped down with a long end, like the sound of a bomb falling. Max the dog snapped to attention. I guess I remembered the search and destroy command right. I pointed to the house, and Max sprinted toward the front, dashing in a quick serpentine. Seeing that the front door was closed, he went to the right, running around the back of the house. I expected him to come around again, but he didn't. 30 seconds later, I heard barking from inside the house. But that was it. Just barking. As if Max was saying, "Come on in, guys. Get a load of this." Charlie and I didn't know if he'd cornered someone, but it was a good sign that we hadn't heard any gunshots and that Max was barking. Charlie cocked his head, and we split up. He went in the back and I ran to the front door, taking cover next to the threshold. A minute later, I heard footsteps, and Charlie opened the door, relaxed. Max brushed by his knee and sat in front of me, waiting for a treat. I didn't have one on me, but I gave him a scratch behind the ear, and that was good enough. "Good boy, Maxie." Charlie opened the door wider, and I followed him into the living room where we'd been seeing the light. The room was bare except for a single card table with the first aid kit and a big screen TV with a live Zoom meeting on the screen. There was no face, though. Instead, it was a cat avatar, which I guess was the reason for Max's "look what I found" barking. "Welcome, Charlie." "Welcome, Maz." "Hello, Max the dog. I'm sorry about the cat avatar. I could be a unicorn if you prefer." The avatar switched to a cartoon unicorn with a rainbow mane of wavy hair. I don't think it helped Max or any of us feel more at ease. "Charlie, I hope that first aid kit will help for now. I told you I wasn't going to harm you. I'm a woman of my word. You'll see that if you decide to be on my side." "What are our choices?" Charlie asked as he began to work on his arm wound. "You have 2 choices. 3 if you include suicide, but I don't think you 2 would choose that. So let's say 2. There's my side, or you can run from my husband, who is the head of the DFM. "Sounds like a bad divorce," Charlie said. "That's exactly what it is," said Mrs. Solar Pope. "The truth, Charlie, is that you and Beth and your entire undercover operation have actually been a catch-and-kill operation. It was set up by my ex-husband to find me and our son. You think you've been working for the Department of Energy's Intelligence and Counterintelligence Division, but really, you've been working for the DFM the entire time." "The Defense of Fossil Minerals," said Charlie. "Yes. The DFM has been a top part of Homeland Security since 9/11, and it's now led by my husband. I won't tell you his name or my name. It's best you not know. The DFM's mission is to protect America's energy and mineral interests. In 2001, that was almost exclusively fossil fuels and uranium. And by protect, I mean the DFM was to make sure that America's oil, gas, coal, and related supply chains were protected from terrorism. That was a practical and noble cause after 9/11. America was frightened that Osama bin Laden would inspire another oil embargo and that Middle East states would seize American oil and gas investments. I was recruited from the CIA, and my husband was recruited from the Defense Intelligence Agency, the DIA. Together, we formed an elite military and intelligence team that protected oil tankers, oil wells, and gas exploration all over the world. I was very proud of that work, and you can imagine how grateful the oil and gas majors were. But then, in 2008, a new president was elected. With Obama's talk of green jobs and climate change, the oil, gas, and coal majors became more frightened of Obama than Osama bin Laden. They thought that their 100 years of fossil fuel subsidies were about to end and that Obama would phase out fossil fuels and mandate a transition to electric cars. So the oil and gas majors reached out to my husband through one of their energy thinky tanks. They asked him to expand his defense of fossil minerals to the halls of Congress and to the deeper, broader government agencies. He was offered $10 million a year in an offshore bank account. But I was not only his wife, I was the co-head of the DFM, so he couldn't do anything without me. When he told me about the offer, I disagreed. We just had our first son. If the DFM protected fossil fuels and continued business as usual, CIA reports predicted global instability and dire consequences for America and the world. For the sake of our country, I knew that our energy transition could not be delayed, but my husband said that it wouldn't matter to us or to our son. He said that rich people like us would have resources to be protected from the worst of climate change and not to worry my pretty little head. That was the beginning of the end of our marriage. I realized that if the world was going to successfully transition to renewables, it needed more money and power than fossil fuels and my husband's DFM deep state regulators, politicians, and enforcers. So I used my global intelligence experience to quietly create a renewable energy investment hedge fund that I call the Solar Syndicate. My syndicate would launder dirty money into bright, shiny, clean energy money. "And your investors?" asked Charlie. "Yes, as you discovered in your 4-year investigation, Charlie, my investors were arms dealers, cocaine dealers, tax cheats, mobsters, and corrupt and embezzling politicians. All upstanding citizens." "Oh, Charlie, please. Do you think my husband or his Harvard-educated fossil fuel overlords are upstanding citizens who follow the law and never ever murder, steal, lie, embezzle, or bribe for the sake of fossil fuel profits?" "No," Charlie admitted. "Then we're on the same page. The difference between my syndicate and my husband's employers is that my partners saw that renewables were the new oil and gas and that the age of fossil fuels was coming to an end. I've known these people since I started my career in the CIA. As long as we made our annual returns, they trusted me to do what was necessary." "How did you separate from your husband?" I asked. "Slowly and carefully. As renewables took off during the Obama years, I planned my marital separation. In 2012, I took our young son with me. Of course, it wasn't a conventional divorce. There was no way my husband would allow me to live knowing what I knew about the DFM and his side job. Oh, he tried to find us, but I've always been resourceful. Even with all of his connections, he couldn't find me until one day one of our investors was caught. He told my husband all about the Solar Syndicate. My husband killed him, but he was inspired. He used his deep state political power to suggest that the DOE's Office of Intelligence and Counterintelligence find me and shut down our money laundering operation. And that's when you were recruited from the solar industry, Charlie. You and Beth were a perfect couple. You knew about solar, and Beth knew how to find people through forensic accounting. Then you found one of my syndicate members, the mayor of an Italian resort island, As you know, I took care of him, but not before the mayor revealed the name of Richard Prout. And that's why you and Beth moved to Oakland, Charlie. My husband set you up with Prout, knowing that eventually Prout would lead you to me and to our son. But my husband didn't want you to arrest me, Charlie. He wanted you to kill me, or at least capture me so that the DFM could kill me. He would have enjoyed that. Of course, to my husband's superiors, he was uncovering a syndicate of criminals who happened to be investing in renewables. Win-win for my hubby and his fossil fuel sponsors. I looked at Charlie and then to the screen. So you're telling me that Charlie and his team have been your husband's private detective agency trying to track you down? Essentially, yes. But it all got shut down. After Richard Prout died, I told Sylvia about Charlie and the DFM running his operations behind the scenes. Unfortunately, Sylvia's home was bugged. When my husband found out that Charlie's catch-and-kill operation had been exposed, he had Homeland Security pull the plug on his operation and then plant some nasty things in his and Beth's files. Have you tried calling home base, Charlie? Did anyone answer? No, Charlie said. And Richie, he's your son? The rainbow unicorn avatar didn't respond. Charlie and I looked at each other. When she came back on, Charlie and I knew we were in trouble. What do you know about my son, Charlie? Richard said he was an accountant. Was he an accountant? If we're talking about the same person, I saw him around the trailer, but we didn't have many interactions. Charlie, I don't get angry at people who tell me the truth. I only get angry at people who lie to me. My son is missing. Did something happen to him? I don't know, Charlie said. Don't lie to me, Charlie. I looked at Charlie. Don't do it. You're not going to like the truth. I like lies less. I'll give you to the count of 3, and if I think you're lying, I'll hurt you in a way that you weren't expecting. Like mother, like son, I said. What's that supposed to mean, Maz? I thought about it, and I realized she probably had us covered somehow. Maybe the house was bombed. So I told her the truth. It means that I knew your son, and he was no accountant. He was Richard Prout's sadist enforcer. His nickname was Richie 3 times, because if he asked you something more than twice, the 3rd time, he'd hurt you. Well, it's nice to know that he takes after his father. He used to give Richie the same warning before a spanking. And what exactly happened to Richie 2 nights ago? Charlie looked down at his hands, remembering 2 nights ago. Then he looked at me, and then at the screen. We were defending ourselves. I killed him. Charlie lied. It was me who killed him. But as usual, Charlie was being a Boy Scout and a good friend. We were defending ourselves. Richie was going to shoot me and Maz, and I disarmed him. With a backhoe, which unfortunately killed him. I only meant to knock him out. If you're going to hurt someone, hurt me. Let Maz go. It wasn't the full truth, but it was enough information for Mrs. Pope to have closure. It's not your fault. Richie took after his father. It's one of the reasons why I left. Until Richie was 12, my husband showed Richie videos of a very dark side of the DFM work. My husband said he was preparing Richie for a dangerous world after climate collapse. But really, it just made a 12-year-old act out in very violent ways. After we left, those violent tendencies didn't dissipate. Eventually, I told him about the Solar Syndicate. He wanted to be a part of it, so I contacted Richard Prout, one of my investors. We were living outside of the U.S. at that time, but Richard agreed to take Richie under his wing for me. He got him into Berkeley and taught Richie the solar business, real estate, and landfills. Richie said he was learning a lot, but I knew it was more than just about business. So I warned Richard. I warned him. I said that if anything unkind should happen to my son, that he should die very publicly, or I would have our cocaine cartel investors kill his entire family down to his last grandchild. And as you know, 2 days ago Richard Prout died very publicly. I didn't know what happened, but I was fairly certain that Richie was dead. I'm very sorry for your loss, said Charlie. Thank you, and thank you for confirming. I don't blame either of you. This was all Richard, and I hope he rots in hell. The Zoom avatar went dark again. I didn't know what to say, but Charlie was still in investigative mode. Is that why you killed Sylvia? Because of your son? Asked Charlie. No, quite the opposite. Richard died publicly. I was honoring our agreement. I was trying to protect Sylvia. My husband sent 2 DFM goons to her house. They tried to force poor Sylvia to tell him everything she knew about me and our syndicate. She said she would after she buried Richard, and they went away. But my husband didn't count on Sylvia's loyalty to me, and to you, Maz and Charlie. She messaged me. Then she sent you 2 here to Chico to get you out of harm's way. But Sylvia was worried about Pauline, Maz. So instead of driving directly to our extraction point, Sylvia took a detour to your home. That's when the DFM assassin shot her at your house and tried to retrieve her cell phone. But before the DFM assassin could get the phone, Beth and Pauline shot his ass off. Then my syndicate friend in the Ford Bronco blew the DFM sniper's head off, allowing Beth to keep Sylvia's cell phone. And that's when Beth found my number, told you, and here we are. That's the whole story, Charlie and Maz. I'm not your enemy, but my husband is. And from what I'm seeing right now in the distance with my drone, his 2 DFM agents that were trolling building commission meetings are about a mile away in an SUV and coming to finish you off. You mean Danny and Randy from the strip club? I asked. Yes, I believe that's their alias names. And to show you there's no hard feelings about you killing my son, I'm going to help you to kill them. I don't want to kill anyone, said Charlie. Didn't you just say that you killed my son in self-defense, Charlie? I did, but that doesn't mean there isn't another non-lethal way. Let me try. I'll kill you if you cross me, Charlie. I won't cross you. Let me try my idea first. One thing that I've always learned about Charlie in the last 2 days is that he always tries to do things by the book. But the DFM people we were dealing with, they could barely read. So what was the point? I knew there was going to be more blood. I just didn't know whether it was going to be our blood or theirs. Dun, 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 dun. 5 minutes later, Danny and Randy, the 2 shitheads from the strip club, pulled up to Mrs. Pope's ranch house. They were bruised in their face, but their scrapes and scratches were patched up with Band-Aids. They got out of their SUV on the driver's side with 2 M4 assault rifles. Even if Charlie and I had enough ammo left in our guns and Max were in full wolf mode, that kind of gunfire would have had us beat. So we did need Mrs. Solar Pope's help. But first, Charlie tried it his way. He stayed inside and opened up the front window and then called out to him. Don't come any closer, Charlie said. We're as well armed as you are. Let's talk this out. To my surprise, Danny and Randy didn't answer with rapid gunfire. Yeah, Mr. Boston, said Randy. You're right. We should have talked earlier to Mr. Botticelli. Sorry about that, Maz. No hard feelings. Especially since you kicked the shit out of us, said Danny. To show they were serious about talking, Randy and Danny lowered their M4s, slightly. Anyway, we want to make you an offer, Charlie and Maz. It'll get you your lives back. Mr. Boston, I have authorization to officially transfer you and your wife from the DOE to the DFM. And Maz, you'll have a clear record too, for once. You can both join the DFM and go back to your lives in Rockridge. Don't believe them, Charlie, said Mrs. Solar Pope. I have an offer too, Charlie said. You call Washington, D.C., and tell your head of the DFM to publicly resign by midnight to the Secretary of Energy. Otherwise, my wife will press send on an email to the Washington Post and to the New York Times. She'll expose the DFM, its officers, all of your real names, and the politicians on the DFM payroll. And just how would you get that information? Danny said. Let's just say that I know a certain Solar Pope. Randy and Danny looked at each other. Mrs. Solar Pope didn't give us that information, He was bluffing, and they believed him. But Randy had a counteroffer. Charlie, may I call you Charlie? That's not a real threat. Even if your wife, Beth is her name, he let that settle in. Even if Beth had all that information, and I doubt she does, but let's say it's true. Your news, your list, all that information wouldn't go anywhere. One call from a certain cabinet member, and that story is going to be spiked. Guaranteed. We've done it before. Okay, maybe you put all that information on YouTube. You think we don't have the power to shut down a YouTube video? Even if we couldn't, and we can. Nobody's going to believe that video except the usual conspiracy whack jobs. Be reasonable, Mr. Boston, called out Danny. Y'all have proven to be great fighters. That's why we want you on the DFM team. We want you to continue looking for Mrs. Solar Pope. Help us finish the job and help us shut down the Solar Syndicate. You don't want to support fentanyl dealers laundering dirty profits through solar projects, do you? Of course you don't. I also don't want to support the DFM corrupting the government for oil and gas profits, Charlie said. It's not just the profits, Charlie. The world needs fossil fuels, and it will always need fossil fuels. Climate change is a hoax, and even if it isn't, well, humans will adapt, but only if we protect our current oil and gas assets. Right? Wrong, said Charlie. Danny shook his head. Sorry to hear that, Charlie. What's that old Winston Churchill saying? History is written by the winners. At that, Danny raised his M4 and started spraying into the ranch. Charlie and I hit the ground and I covered Max on the ranch house floor. From the Zoom session, we heard Mrs. Solar Pope. Do you want my help now, Charlie? Yes. Outside, Randy and Danny were shooting up the windows and getting closer, but they were being a little cautious. They were thinking that Charlie and I were going to pop up with an over-the-shoulder missile launcher, but we had something better. We had Mrs. Solar Pope with a second drone that was hiding in the alfalfa fields next to the ranch house. We saw the Zoom monitor screen switch to that view. The second drone lifted in the air, and we saw the ranch house roof and Danny and Randy firing into our window. Then suddenly the bullet stopped. From overhead, we saw Danny look up at the drone's camera, and the son of a bitch, he looked frightened. He lifted his M4, but that was the wrong move. He should have run, because the drone then dropped a little package hovering over them. From the Zoom monitor, I heard Mrs. Solar Pope say, "Bombs away." I don't know how big that bomb was, but it was big enough to explode in midair and decapitate Danny. Randy's head stayed on, but his chest looked like a bloody red pothole. Neither of them were going to be writing any history books. That I can tell you. Dun, la, 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 la. Later that night, we buried Danny and Randy with the other pinheads at the Prouts Chico landfill. In a few years, these buried DFM cats were going to be sleeping under a new solar farm built by the Solar Syndicate. After we finished burying them, we went back to the ranch house to finish our conversation with Mrs. Solar Pope. There's no going back to your old life now, Charlie and Maz. You realize that now, don't you? Yeah, I said. But Charlie, he didn't say anything. He was still hoping that he could somehow go back to the DOE and make things right. Charlie, I told you in the beginning that you had two choices. I think your first choice is closed. The second choice is to join me. With Maz's underworld connections and your solar intelligence connections, you two and your wives could help me to defeat the DFM and my hubby's oily, gassy overlords. How do you see us helping? Charlie asked. You'll be busy for sure. Our syndicate may be funded by drugs, tax cheats, and corruption, but you'll be doing good, Charlie. In fact, my old DFM sources tell me that my husband is planning to use a special ops team to destabilize California's grid and blame the blackouts on renewables. I'd like you and Maz to lead our counter-special ops team. You'll stop these energy terrorists and protect the grid from going down. And how will the syndicate profit? Asked Charlie. Yes, you see the theme now. Whatever you do, the syndicate will always profit. In this case, we'll be protecting renewable energy's public reputation. Politics won't support renewables if the DFM's politicians blame solar for crashing the grid. Second, we directly or indirectly own many solar projects in the state, and we get paid for every kilowatt hour generated by solar energy. If the grid goes down, our solar production will be curtailed and we'll lose tens of millions of dollars in one day. We have some energy storage, but not enough to protect our losses. So yes, Charlie, we will always have a syndicate self-interest in our good deeds. But it's not all about profit. People's lights, air conditioners, and hospitals won't be affected during the next heat wave. If you succeed. And if we don't, I asked, then like any employer, I'll be disappointed, Maz. And if we lose a certain amount of money, like any employer, we'll sit you down and talk about making improvements. But if poor performance continues, of course we'll have to let you go. Meaning, asked Charlie. You can read our separation agreement at another time. For now, I need a verbal commitment, Charlie and Maz. Before you leave the house, say you'll join us. You and your wives will be protected. You all have valuable talents. So you'll all have generous salaries and benefits, and you'll also have new identities that will allow you to complete the missions. And what if we say no? Charlie asked. If you say no, you're a fool. And I'll be disappointed. But I'm not going to kill you. I don't have to. If you run and hide, I'm certain that my husband and his DFM gas holes will find you, especially now that I have explained everything about the genesis of your mission. I looked at Charlie. What Mrs. Solar Pope said made sense to me. But Charlie still wasn't convinced. How can we trust her, Maz? If she wasn't on the level with us, we'd already be dead. We wouldn't have had this conversation. Charlie shook his head. It was just like me when I was a kid frustrated by the ending of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. He wanted certainty that his life and Beth's life would continue, and that the bad guys would go to prison, and that the good guys and gals would fly away in a magic car and have more exciting but safe adventures. As for me, like Grandpa told me, I rewound the memory tape. I remembered all that we'd done, and every bloody twist, and I thought, yeah, I can imagine what's next if we continued that story. The DFM is going to track us down and kill us. But if Charlie and I went with the Solar Syndicate, that would be a new story. Unpredictable, but safer than going back to Rockridge. I'm in, I said. So's Max the dog. Eventually, Charlie said yes too. And that's why I recorded everything that happened on this YouTube video for you, Pauline, and for you, Beth. Charlie said that this is your secret messaging system. Now you two know everything we know. And if something ever happens to us, a reporter at the New York Times is going to get a link to this video. And Beth, if you don't believe me that everything's okay, here's Charlie. It's okay to come back from New Jersey, Beth. Send us another message. Tell us where you want to meet. So that's it. Pauline, I don't know what it's going to take for you to come back from New Jersey, but I love you, sweetheart. Join me and Charlie and Max the dog. Our phones are dead, but you can record and upload a message here, and we'll be watching every day. Okay? See you soon, Pauline. Okay, Charlie. I'm tired. Turn it off. Let's get to work. And that's the finale of The Solar Heist, or How I Got Into the Solar Business. Is this the end of the Solar Heist story? I think, like Maz's grandfather said, you can imagine what's going to happen next. As for this episode's true solar takeaways, do check the show notes. The U.S. Department of Energy does have an Office of Intelligence and Counterintelligence, and they do inform policymakers, Homeland Security and Cybersecurity, and other agencies about threats to America's energy security. As for the DFM, the Defense of Fossil Minerals Agency is not real. I pulled that completely out of thin air. But is there an energy deep state? Are there politicians, government bureaucrats, think tanks, media, and private corporations intentionally slowing down our transition away from fossil fuels? I think if you look at the headlines, it may not be a coordinated agency, but it does seem to be real. That's it for now. If you like this Solar Heist series, I'll be putting all the episodes into a single recording at the end of the season. Please do share it with other people who like a good solar noir story. More new original solar stories are coming up. In fact, next week I'll be sharing my first live storytelling recording from the nation's largest annual solar conference. It's slightly based on a true solar story, and I hope you enjoy it. Probably True Solar Stories is a production of Unthinking Solar PR and Communications. Be bold for solar, stand out, and educate. Thanks again for listening.